This is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. Join me as I talk to women entrepreneurs about the nuts and bolts of their journeys and to experts who will give you insights that are hard to find anywhere else. Let's jump in. How do you take a runaway viral moment and transform it into an effective and sustainable organization on a global scale? How do you create a culture and work environment that protects and safeguards your highest values as that organization? And how do you do all of this with the slimmest of budgets, all powered by unpaid volunteers spread across the world? In this episode, Isvari Maranwe, ex-physicist and cybersecurities lawyer and CEO of Dweebs Global and DG Sentinel, talks about how an early pandemic experiment to help others turned into a global movement. The challenges and rewards of building an enduring organization by taking yourself entirely out of the picture while still working full-time on it, recruiting and motivating a global volunteer force, and much more. Now, here's Isvari. Hello, Isvari. Welcome to Invisible Inc.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
We're really excited, so I'm going to jump right in. You've had an incredibly interesting career. I was looking at your profile. You've come across STEM, law, and now advocacy, mentorship. What has been the motivating factor? What drives the engine?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question because I think there is a common thread as to why I left everything else I did and sort of how I ended up where I am. So I always felt when I was working in physics and then when I was in the law and in other places that I wasn't quite impacting the world the way that I wanted to. With physics specifically, at some point I felt like if I continued to work in this field, which I found very interesting, it wasn't impacting things that were happening around the world that I cared a lot about. And so I would say that I felt a bit guilty about that. I felt like I wasn't spending my time in the way that I ought to. And so that trying to figure out how to impact the world in the best way possible has been a huge driving factor as I've gone along my career. I've also very accidentally fallen into most of what I've done in my life. So I was good at math and science. I got research opportunities in physics. I pursued them. I applied to law school sort of on a whim and I got in, and then I went to law school, and then I became an attorney, and almost every job that I had as an attorney was something that fell into my lap. It was just the right thing at the right time. And I didn't have a ton of options that I was debating. It was just like, this is the obvious best choice. It's a mix of wanting to impact the world and then luck and happenstance to get me where I am now.
That is fascinating. At some point, clearly, you left the law and you decided to become an entrepreneur. What triggered that move?
Yeah, the pandemic, actually, which I think is true for a lot of people. The last job that I had as an attorney, I was at a temporary commission. So we only existed for 3 years in total. And we had advice to give Congress, legislation to draft. It was a cool job, but it was winding down anyway. And I left around March 2020-ish, right as the pandemic hit. And I was planning to travel. And I just wanted to take a little bit of a break. I'd been working really hard as an attorney. I was tired. I just wanted a few months off before I went back to probably working in the government. And pandemic happened. And so instead of being able to travel, I found myself at home along with, my co-founders, my husband and my sister. And we're okay, we can't travel now. Maybe it's going to take a couple weeks. We didn't think it was going to last much longer. So while we're sitting at home, how do we help people? And we can just post online and just say that we are ourselves happy to help with resume edits or mental health or however we can personally help our own network on LinkedIn. And that's what I put out. And it was never meant to become a big deal. It was just something to do for a couple of weeks. And then it again sort of just took off on its own accidentally. A whole bunch of people joined. Someone else had the idea, why don't we create a Slack page? Why don't we put all of our names up on a website so that people know who they can reach out to and they can choose the best potential mentor or potential resume editor for them. And it all just sped up from there. Within a couple months, we had hundreds of mentors who had asked to help other people. We had talked about transitioning off of LinkedIn. We were like, okay, maybe we should make this a nonprofit, get registered as a 501c3. And so it just sped up from there. And I think the experiences that I had at Dweebs Global are very, very different than what we're doing right now at the DG Sentinel. And I think there's a lot of interesting comparisons there because Dweebs Global just sort of accidentally took off and it accidentally happened. And I had no plans to start a nonprofit or start anything or be serious about it or any of it. And then with the DG Sentinel, we're so intentional. It's been like a year in the making before we even launch, really getting our team together, making sure everything is perfect. And it's just a very, very different experience. And I love both ways of doing things, but accidental entrepreneur again. I don't know if it's like, it counts being an entrepreneur or starting a nonprofit, but still very, very accidental.
Yeah, it totally does. Just to clarify, nonprofits are real businesses too. You have to be economically viable. If not, you don't stick around. So in my book, it counts.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, where did the name come from?
Yeah, it's a very interesting story, and it highlights how accidental it was. So my family and I, we had a YouTube account where we were just putting out stuff for family and some comedy stuff. And we had called it Dweebs and Dogs because we're huge dweebs. We love playing board games. We were just like, this is a nice channel. We have a dog. It was like, this is cute. And when we launched, it happened so quickly. We did not have time to think about, oh, let's get another website. Let's think of a name. Let's register another URL. Let's put stuff up. And we didn't think it was going to last that long. So we were like, hey, we'll just put a page on our family website. We'll just put a page saying, if you're looking for the mentorship, here it is. Here's a list of the folks who've offered to help. Of course, that ended up taking over the rest of the website. Within, I think, 2 months, maybe even the first month, we had to take down everything that was about us and about our family and about our books and other things we were writing. And it turned just into the nonprofit account. And so because we had dweebsanddogs.com at the time, and we were able to get dweebsanddogs.org, that sort of stuck. And so first we were the Dweebs and Dogs Foundation, which was very, very like, what do we do with this name that clearly wasn't made for a mentorship nonprofit? And then as we went along that year and did a whole rebranding and whole conversation about how we wanted to portray ourselves into the world, we thought about what if we completely change our name? But at that time, the Dweebs moniker part, at least, had stuck. Our community was really passionate about it. People were like, I'm part of Dweebs Global. I'm a Dweeb. This is part of my identity. And so we had so much great SEO and so much great branding around it that part we had to keep. And then we just made it Dweebs Global. And we actually filed to change our name. And so now we're the Dweebs Global Foundation and we're at dweebsglobal.org. And we've been at dweebsglobal.org for a couple of years now. But that was as far as we could push the rebrand at the time. So that's how the name happened.
I love it. It's the best story I've heard. So thanks to the dog. So you have this idea. It's a mentorship model. Walk me through the first days. Like, what was the actual model? Like, who are the mentors? And if I wanted to be a mentee, how would I get in touch with you? What was that machinery like?
Originally, it was people reaching out directly on LinkedIn to people that they found on our website because we had a list there. Or people just saw my post on LinkedIn, let's say, and reached out to me personally. So my DMs were so full and I was getting a lot of resumes and I would edit them and give them back to people and help them find jobs and just help in the early days of the pandemic, which was also a very economically troubling time for a lot of folks. As things went on, we instituted a Google form pretty early on so people could come to our website. We encouraged people to be anonymous if they felt like there were things that they couldn't share and encouraged people to write why they were reaching out to us. Is this just for a resume edit? Is this for mental health support? Like, what do you sort of need? And we've kept that model to this day. So we have a Google form. It's a one-stop shop. You can submit it. It comes directly to us. And then we had a back end of volunteers deciding who to match to whom. And as far as becoming a mentor, we also have a become a mentor form that we instituted pretty early on. So when people messaged us, we could take everyone's information in one place. So getting their name, their background, are they senior, are they mid, are they junior, where are they located around the world, and things like that. Now, as time went on, we realized that this is our scalability problem because having 2 Google forms, having a lot of mentors come in once we've hit like several hundred, 1,000 mentors, it's too much for any one person to be able to think through who are all our mentors in biology. It was very difficult, even as we split it into different careers. And so what we've done over the past year is develop a very unique system that we're going to continue to put AI on and just start to create an automatic mentor-mentee matching process. And so we're starting with our mental health support, our resume edits, automatically matching mentees and mentors, rating our mentors, figuring out ways to match them more effectively, and creating long-lasting connections without there having to be a volunteer matching everyone one-on-one. But that has worked for 2 years, right? So like, it's a great example of how if you have a really strong idea and you're like, this is where I want to get in the future, like just start. You'll figure out what the problems are, what you need to produce, but it's worth it to still just start instead of waiting until everything's perfect. So yeah.
Early days, right? You're doing all of this stuff. It's super busy. Were there any stories or big aha moments that stick out in your mind?
Yeah, I feel like it was really a cascade, but I thought about this question because there was definitely this moment, and it seems so small now. There was definitely this moment, probably in week 2 or 3. We were literally in my parents' attic. We quarantined with my parents. So it was like my husband, sister, and I in the attic, and we got on this call with a couple people who had joined early on, who had suggested Slack, who had suggested certain tech that we could produce, who were helping us build out the website. And there were 3 or 4 people on that call, and in addition to us. And it just felt very real. Like, oh, look, there are these 3 people who are around the world. And back then it was less usual for there to be like a lot of people around the world on this call. And it was just really cool. And so everyone was on this call and we were like, oh, it's real. It's like more than us. There are these other real human beings in other parts of the world who are existing, who are thinking about this, who are part of it. And so it felt really real. And so even to this day, honestly, like sometimes I'll be on a meeting where there's like 20 or 30 people and we're from all over the world. And there's a moment where I'll be like, oh, it's really cool that these people have been brought together by something that I was a part of and helped create. And it's like they're real people doing real things. And it just is very exciting. So I would say probably that like Google Meet was a moment where I was like, this is real and clearly it's going somewhere.
It seems small, but many of these are so pivotal that you look back and you're like, that is the moment when I knew this was going to be a thing. You now have DG Sentinel as well, right? So
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about DG Sentinel. What's the plan? What's the vision?
Yeah. So the DG Sentinel originally started because we had so many mentors at Dweebs Global who passionately wanted to tell their stories. And we wanted a place for them to have their voice heard beyond just our website, because we didn't really have a way to have their personal blog style articles shared. And what started as just that idea took off very strongly. So we have an incredible board. Some of the first people who joined, Kayla Ingram and Scott Lamb, they're a best-selling author and vice president of content at Medium. Scott's had experience with BuzzFeed and Medium, so a lot in this sort of magazine, newspaper space. And then as this year, 2022, has progressed, we've really seen how important our solution is to the market right now. So having a nonprofit community media space in between media and community media as a way for marginalized voices to be heard, focusing on stories that are not from America, not coming from that Western bias, uplifting voices of real people who live in countries like India, Nigeria, South Africa, Myanmar, instead of sending in a foreign journalist to like point behind them and be like, look at these cute brown people. These brown people live this way. Just asking these human beings who are capable of talking for themselves to tell their story. We're really passionate about that, honest mental health coverage from people, like people's actual experiences, humanity, lifestyle and relationships outside of the Western model, thinking about things like arranged marriages, interracial relationships, queer relationships, all of these things. We just really wanted to uplift voices, and we're doing that on the editorial side. And in addition to that, as this year has gone on sort of talking about how this idea has taken shape, we realized we really wanted to build a community to replicate what mentors have at Dweebs Global and bring it to everybody in the world. Because our mentor community is so strong and so vibrant. They've come up with so many powerful ideas that they've really tried to use to impact their local communities beyond mentorship, beyond what we do. They've had animal rights side solutions. They've had, women's health stuff. They've been working on apps for visually impaired people. They have all these ideas. And we were like, hey, how do we take that community model and bring it to the public? And so we have this sort of social media, community media aspect, the DG Sentinel, where we're really trying to provide a system and tech support and social space and ability to get to know other people who also want to change the world, so that you're able to make these meaningful relationships that are not built around fame, money, or power, but are built around our definition of success, which is the good you do in the world. I always tell people, think like Medium and BuzzFeed with some of the best parts of Tumblr and Reddit in terms of creating social communities. We're not a content creation site, so not like TikTok or YouTube. If we could call some sites content creation sites and some sites social media or community media, we're very much on that side.
Excellent. And you're expanding rapidly. It's kind of running on its own, right? Before you realize what's happening. And yet it requires resources, it requires money, it requires some kind of organizational structure. Let's first talk about org structure. You said quickly you decided you were going to be a nonprofit. How did that decision happen?
So one of the nice things about being an attorney, I will say, is that you just know a lot of attorneys. My husband's also an attorney. It's like the first thing you think about is like, how do I make this like actually just work from a legal perspective? And I actually think that if anyone wants to start a nonprofit organization, if you can find a friend who's a lawyer who's going to come on board, they're so valuable, because they will do a lot of that work that you won't realize you need to do, but they know, because we're trained to issue spot in law school. So that's really why our first thought was like, oh, if we get money, is it going to be tax deductible? No, not unless we're registered as a 501c3. And that has to be done way in advance. And through the course of starting up Dweebs Global, we realized that that takes time. You have to register as a 501c3, then you have to register with organizations that confirm you're a 501c3, and then you can do partnerships with organizations like Google or Amazon and things like that. They make sure that you're registered with like other people like TechSoup or other places. So we realized very early on we wanted to be registered. We wanted to have that status. So Dweebs Global, it was, probably month 2 or 3, we filed and heard back. I think organizational strategy, though, is so key what you're saying. And I think the DG Sentinel is a great example of that because we've had time to build it out the right way this time. So Megan Miller, who is the COO at the DG Sentinel, could not have created this organization without her. She's just absolutely incredible. And I always talk about how important it is to have a people-driven organization. So she originally came on board as CHRO of the DG Sentinel. And that was the first major position that we had at that organization, besides me as the CEO. And really, I wasn't CEO until she became part of it because, there's nothing to CEO about until you have a team. She was originally CHRO and I think that's honestly the most important role when you start anything new. People often talk about the CTO, super important. You talk about finances, getting money, super important. But without people, especially as a nonprofit, without volunteers, without being able to create something, you don't have anything. And so for me, the CHRO is really the most important role to handle talent acquisition and engagement and structure and policies and procedures. That's all Megan. So as this year has gone on, the two of us have really worked together to create a very strong team. And the way we structured hiring or acquisitions or volunteer acquisition in our case is going out and doing these calls and doing these interviews with people and really asking them what drives them, what's their mission, how do they think they would see this develop. And especially in the first year, even prior to launch, we're looking for people who are thinking of this as their baby too, people who are going to come and be a part of the founding team. Vision, mission, time commitment, these are all very important, but you may still make missteps. And so you have these trial time periods where in the first 3 months, you make sure things are working well. And then we revisit it, and having all these roles, have this structure that I really advocate where we both have a C role, like a C-level role, CTO, CMO, and then we have deputy roles, deputy CMO, deputy CTO, who have the same bailiwick as the C level. And that way there's always a second in command ready to step up who can help with that position. And that's a model that I just took straight from the government, from my experiences working as an attorney. You have the Secretary of Defense and the Deputy Secretary. Where I worked, we had the General Counsel, the Deputy General Counsel, and then attorneys, right? So I think that model has worked really, really well when it comes to making a strong structure, especially when you're all volunteer, predominantly volunteer, so that nobody feels overwhelmed and people have others to lean on.
The moment you start hiring people, especially if they're full-time, you're talking about needing funds. Can you talk about how you approach funding initially and then what your sustainable funding strategy is as you bring it to its full potential?
One of the things we've always tried to do at Dweebs Global is stay sustainable on little to no funding. And part of the reason for that is because we didn't want to be reliant on people coming and going, or money coming and going, I should say, and that changing our model. So a little bit of a non-second, then I'll get back to things just so for context, right? Dweebs Global is a very marketable model, right? So this is true too of the DG Sentinel. I think one of the most common questions I get asked is, why is the Sentinel a nonprofit when it's such a cool tech startup idea that could get a lot of VC funding with the team we have in place? And so it's a question I get very often. And at Dweebs Global, same sort of thing happened when people found out how many mentors we had, how many mentees we've had. You're talking thousands of people. You're talking a very marketable model where we could charge people a nominal fee to find a mentor, or we could charge companies to put advertising on our app or on our website. And end of the day, Dweebs Global were very, very strict about what we consider our ethical guidelines. We never even ask mentees to donate. So for reference, we never want to even ask people we've helped, even a year on, hey, if we helped you, can you please send $10 our way? And the reason for that is because we wanted to literally be easy, completely available to anyone everywhere who needs us without anything that may prevent someone from reaching out. And so we learned in some communities, right, you ask people for money, they feel very obligated to give, especially if you help them. And we didn't want to create that obligation. So what we realized is by hamstringing ourselves, right, we're not going to sell these things. We're not going to sell data. We're not doing these things. How do we still make money? And I'll get there in a sec. But I think one of the things that we realized is we need to be able to run on all volunteers. And part of the way that we've succeeded at doing that is our mentors are always going to be all volunteer. We ask for less than 2 hours a month from some folks. But the idea is that you can mentor as much or as little as you want to. You can take several mentees, you can have few mentees. It's just a really great way to give back. And it's something that people really enjoy. It's a very, very fulfilling way to volunteer and a very easy way to volunteer because you're just doing what you do at your day job and helping someone get ahead. So that's how the Dweebs Global model has developed because we wanted to make sure we could be infinitely scalable with very little to no funding. In terms of how we then have thought about funding, there's obviously grants. High net worth donors is something where, like, the DJ Sentinel is I think all about high net worth donors, right? Finding those initial founding donors who can come in and are interested in fair and open media and media organizations and a nonprofit community social media platform. Like, that's all high net worth donors. And there's potential for that as well on the Dweebs Global side. But I think also partnering with corporations, partnering to provide engagement activities. We've done a whole bunch of different talks with different universities where we basically bring in speakers to talk about a bunch of different topics, to mentor in a bunch of different areas, including mental health, and provide these sort of seminars. And so that's another way where those who have money can provide the ability for us to then go ahead and offer those same things to people who have less. So I would say that across both orgs, our primary goals as we have developed funding and continue to develop funding is to take money from places like the United States and the UK, where there are high net worth individuals, and use that money to run something around the world, rather than focusing on more of a crowdfunding model where that burden would equally fall around the world and asking people who actually use our services for money. So it's a little more complicated than that. There's some things that we're potentially paywalling. There's some ways we do funding. There's swag out. But really, I think it's this grant, family foundations, high net worth.
So just from what you're saying, it sounds like you've got a bedrock of the core sources which are going to be grants and high net worth individuals, but you're not averse to checking out smaller sources of revenue more from an exploratory. What is it? Is that the drive behind the swag and all of those others?
No. And it's so good the way you described it as well, because one of the big advantages of smaller sources of revenue isn't actually the revenue itself, which is always great. It's actually the community building and marketing aspects of it. So when you run like a crowdfunding donor campaign, what we often feel we're doing is asking people to commit $5, $10. Even if a lot of people give that money, that's not going to be enough for us to do anything major with it. But if you give $5 to an organization, you are 10 times more likely to go and check them out every few months to be like, what do they do? Because you made a financial commitment to them. And so same with our swag, right? Like, honestly, we're not trying to make a ton of money off our swag or any money at all. We just want people to buy our swag, wear your swag. You're basically getting people to advertise what your products for free. They walk around the world wearing your swag. So I think it's honestly more of a way to create a community and to market, especially in the early days, than it is a source of revenue. Now, a lot of our swag team is so passionate about creating something in the future that's not just a source of revenue, but a source of revenue for local partners. So at the Sentinel, we're actually creating something tentatively named the Sentinel Showcase, but basically it's a swag store where we feature local artists from around the world who create one product for us. They'll be like Sentinel makeup set or Sentinel art, or like Sentinel, this is my drawing, digital art for the Sentinel, or that they create or that they want to sell. And that's a way for them to be featured on our store. And then you can go check out the rest of their work and the rest of their products. And it's a way for us to, again, uplift these smaller businesses around the world and these different cultural expressions, because so many people, so much of makeup and beauty and swag is all Americanized, right? Like foundation and makeup that American people like, or like totes, sweaters, shirts, right? You're not seeing like a churidar swag. You're not like, here's a Sentinel dupatta, buy it, right? Like, that doesn't happen. So we really want to do that. We want to feature all these things from around the world. We want to bring these smaller businesses into the swag industry. And so again, a way to community build, but hopefully also a way to raise some revenue for these people as well as ourselves into the future.
And one of the criticism that has been leveled against the nonprofit model is that it's not self-sustaining in terms of self-perpetuating the social change that you want. So my question is, would you ever consider making at least the swag part a little bit more economically self-sustaining? So for example, taking a cut of the sales, is that even in consideration? Or
So yes, absolutely. So the Sentinel is a little bit more open to some of the traditional models of funding than Dweebs Global. And part of the reason for that is because we are a media org. We are putting content out in the world we would love to be able to pay people for. And that is a prime priority for us. It is not a free mentorship model with that direct help and guidance. We actually are featuring Dweebs Global on our website, right? So it's like if you read an article and you're like, hey, I need help, you can go and get help for free. And then we're not going to bother you because that's a safe space for you to get help. But if you're on our site reading our content, it'd be great to support us. Please donate. Please support us. And same with the swag, absolutely. When we're looking for partners, we're like, okay, create some swag for us. We're getting a cut for this. You're getting some great free publicity. You're getting a cut of this. And then hopefully people check out your art, your website as well. So it's very much a win-win situation. And it being a win-win situation, like you're saying, is what allows us to be able to provide this to more and more people in the future. So absolutely.
One other question on the funding and the org structure, and then we'll move on to other fun stuff. Clearly, this takes a tremendous amount of time for you, for your co-founders, and time isn't free. Like, people need to eat. So is there an entry-level barrier that says, hey, you can only do this if you have resources of a certain kind and you're not under pressure? I don't want to ask you how you tackle that. What is your thought?
No, 100%. And actually, I have a few very specific changes that could be made to the industry. So I'll also share those thoughts. But absolutely, there's a huge barrier to entry. And in fact, I have worked, as you mentioned, like I've been in physics. I was in particle physics. And then I was in national security and cybersecurity law, like extremely white, extremely male fields. The nonprofit industry is by far the worst place when it comes to funding that I've ever worked in. I would say sexism is a little bit less in that, like, there is definitely a lot of power that white women have in the industry through their networks, but the racism and the institutional sexism is pretty hard to overcome. And a part of the reason it stays so cloistered while we make strides to break in as people of color, as minorities, as women, to break into other places, the reason the nonprofit industry remains so cloistered is because it is so expensive to get into it. And really only people who already have money can enter it, or people who are willing to make huge sacrifices. And so I'm definitely in that category. But honestly, like, I'm still privileged, right? Like, I was an attorney, which is where I had savings so that I could use those. And then my husband's an attorney and he went back to being an attorney. So although he still works on this, like, a lot of us have full-time jobs and do this part-time. And that also means that we probably don't have children, or we don't have to take two jobs, right? In America today, a lot of people are working two jobs. Globally, the economy is very tentative. A lot of people just don't have the time where they would be able to volunteer or start something on the side in addition to their day job. Absolutely. The barriers to entry are huge. And I think once you're in, the barriers just continue. If you are a white person with a funding idea, you will get money so much faster. You'll get money on the idea. You don't need proof. Also, the big thing in the nonprofit industry, I just got shared the stat from an advisor of mine, but more than 75% of funds that come from donors come without them looking up your website. They literally give it just on the strength of that connection they feel with you from when you ask them for money. And so you can imagine just how horrible that is. If you want to go out, like for us, we have incredible stats, right? Like our dollar per dollar impact is really high, right? But it doesn't matter because they're not looking to know that their money is making an impact. They're looking to feel good. Like most donors are looking to feel good. They're looking for, you have other celebrities who are going to pat me on the back for giving money and who are going to be like, oh, you're so cool. And there's this really cute thing that you did. And let's invite you to this gala. And so unfortunately, a lot of the industry is still like that. You have to be able to afford a dress to go to that gala. You have to be able to afford to look and sound like a rich person or like a rich wife, right? Like my husband's a rich person and I can start a nonprofit. So it's definitely got all those problems, very challenging, requires money to start. I will say that if your goal isn't to raise money, it's easier to start a nonprofit, however. So one of the first things that I will say is that one way the industry can change is just providing better ways to connect people who have skills and who are willing to use those skills to help to other people with ideas in the same space who want to solve a specific issue. So there are a lot of technologists who earn enough money in their day jobs who will code a website for free if it's an area they care about. There are a ton of graphic designers who will do your logo for free if it's an issue they care about. There's so many people who will do their day job for free, and that's how you cut costs down. And so you're able to do this in your free time as a side hustle. But you're not going to get rich off this side hustle. Like I've never made a penny from any of the social media content I put out there as an influencer or anything like that, unlike many of my friends, because their primary motive with that side hustle was to convert. And if your primary goal is to start something that's good in the world and are a nonprofit, you're probably not making those conversions. That may not be your primary goal, but it's still so valuable to have those connections and to go out there. The second big change that needs to be made is actually right now, you're not allowed in the United States under the current union guidelines to hire fundraisers on contingency. And this has kept out a lot of people, especially smaller nonprofits run by people of color, nonprofits working with fundraisers overseas to grow. Because in America, the union says you have to pay a fundraiser from the get-go. They can't work on contingency. And a lot of the reason behind that was to keep this barrier for entry in place. I can go a long story on that, but like these are some of the ways I think we should change the industry, make it more accessible for people to be able to start something.
I learned a lot. That is eye-opening. So a couple of interesting points there. Number one, it sounds to me like you were very clear early on that this is not how you're going to become the next Bill Gates, and you are okay with that.
Yes. I have to share this, like this is my perspective in life, but I really hope that more people can do this. You can walk away from the ladder climbing structure in the United States and in the world. So after you earn about $75,000 to $80,000 a year, which is still a lot for most of the world. It's insane amounts of money for most of the world. But after you earn that, your happiness doesn't increase with the more money you earn. So there's no reason to continually chase that. And so I left law school at 20 years old. I earned $180,000 plus bonus. I will probably never earn that kind of money again, given the career that I'm in now. I would never pay myself that from a nonprofit. I think that's unethical. But I made that choice and I would make that choice again and I didn't even think of it as like something because I don't need that much money to be happy. I live in a like one bedroom and I am privileged enough to be able to travel and I'm privileged. I'm not saying I'm not privileged. Like these are all privileges. A lot of people have a lot less than I do. But whenever I talk to people who are chasing the corporate ladder or the money ladder, honestly, they make more than I do. They don't make less than I do. And I know a lot of people around the world who are much less privileged who find the time to give back or find ways to give back or are passionate about community. What does their family think of them? What do their friends think of them? What's their impact on the world when they leave? These are things you can care about and you can choose to care about more than how much money is in your bank account. And so I really promote that. That's what the Sentinel's about actually, is to try and rewire our brains to care more about that instead of caring about like how many people have liked your latest social, how many people think you're pretty, how many can you afford the latest Chanel. There you go. But like instead of that, like really thinking about, hey, I want to brag about how much good in the world I've done in the world. I want to be proud of that. I want that to be a really cool thing people look up to and are like, I want to do that. And then it motivates other people to want that. And I think that's the FOMO that people should have, is like, I don't want to miss out on making an impact when everyone else is making an impact. I really think you can buy out of the system. You can choose to just like, in America in general, we are very privileged, very, very, very privileged. There's people talk a lot about not having enough in America, and it's true, a lot of people don't. But compared to what people have in countries like Nigeria, Myanmar, India, South Africa, like just Kenya, like the rest of the world, like we have a lot here, and a lot of people have a lot more than they realize. And I hope that motivates people to take some of that and then give back.
One more thought on that, and I'll come back to a second point, and that is, to the extent that you're kind of making a scalable and sustainable model from this nonprofit, it should be possible, at least in theory, for you to say, I'll give it 10 years of my life and I'll make it to a point where I can walk away and it's grown up. It doesn't need me to be a nanny anymore. I put it into where it's economically self-sustaining. I can still walk away. Do you think that's even reasonable?
Absolutely. And actually, like, I'm so glad you brought this up because we see a lot of corporations, companies, and nonprofits today be so reliant on one person in charge. We just saw that at Disney with Bob Iger coming back. The reason that happens is unfortunately because so many people, and this is not exactly what happened in the Disney case, but so many people today are tempted to build brands around them, around a cult personality. Elon Musk is Tesla. Bill Gates is Microsoft. Like they are famous. There's personalities around them and their talent. And that's why these organizations rise and fail on these specific leaders. Whereas when you look at these very long-term media organizations like the New York Times, nobody can tell you who runs the New York Times masthead. It's not about one person. It is about the institution that is the BBC, that is the Times, that is the Post, that is like, they are thinking, we're going to be around in 100 years. And what do we want people, what is our impact on society? Maybe we'll be online. Maybe we'll have a newspaper. Maybe there'll be an app. There might be all these different products. But end of the day, there is something you're creating that is so much bigger than this moment, than this potential for you to be able to raise an audience and then exit. There's so much longer. So you think about that from day one, and the way you structure an org is just honestly night and day. So at BG Sentinel, I am always saying, like, I cannot be the only person talking about the org on social media. This is not Iswari's org. I don't even use the title founder because I don't look at it like that, right? Like there are so many of us out there. Our TikTok has a whole bunch of people on it. Like I will step in and help when I can because I know that I have time and I can help. But it is so important to me that it is not Iswari's pet project. Like I go out there, I always talk about the org, what we're planning to achieve, the amazing folks we have on our advisory board, but I'm not talking about like, I'm so cool. I graduated really young. I've done like a million different things. And now I, this cute little kid, am producing this org support me. But the thing is, that's what everyone does. You go and you look at the latest companies that are out there, it's all about the person who founded it. And it makes sense that people do that because, like I was saying before, the money, it goes to the person. People are like backing the jockey, not the horse. I cannot, if I had $1 for every time someone told me that, I'm backing the jockey, not the horse. I'm like, no, like honestly, it's the horse that's important. It's the product, right? If I leave, someone else is going to come in and it's going to be the same. And we're thinking like, how are we going to impact society? How is this going to be a major player into the future? Yes, I have a lot of friends who are startup founders and I have great respect for what they're doing. And I totally understand what they're doing and why they do it, but they're definitely on this cycle. They're serial entrepreneurs. Everyone wants to be a serial entrepreneur. Everyone wants to be in and out and in. You create something, it's about you, you're cool, and then you sell it and it's the next thing. And it's all about you as a person. That's the coverage people are looking for. And when you do that, it gets tied too much to who you are and tied too much to the success and failure of that one person. And I'm very careful about it because it does. It makes you feel like you deserve that, like you're more important than everyone else.
On the one hand, you have this little tension where the whole world in marketing is moving towards founder branding because it's no longer enough. So it feels like you have to actually use your brand as kind of trainer wheels to support it in the beginning, to give it legs, and then you have to know the exact moment to pull back and build an organization that can now live on its own without having to come to you as a mothership for constant replenishment of supplies or what have you. So fascinating. And also it tells me the importance of organizational discipline, which typically doesn't get talked in the same breath as a nonprofit.
You're exactly right. What it is it's hard for people to step back. So one of my huge advantages is I've done, like when I was originally a content creator on LinkedIn, when I chose to become an attorney, when I joined a law firm later, when I worked for the government, I was not allowed to post whatever I wanted online, right? Like that was not like, I chose that. I was like, if I work for the Department of Defense, if I choose to leave, if I have to shut down all of my social media, I'm okay with it. And I was never really tantalized by the concept of online fame. But it is so tantalizing because those companies, they literally have people, psychologists who study human behavior to reward you for continuing to check, for tying your personal identity to how successful you are online, to how many hits you get, to how famous you are. And people go back and check. And this is like horrible for your mental health. Like a lot of founders are happy to do the ramp up, but then it's really hard to step back. So my problem is that I actually don't like the ramp up. Having been in the social media world for a while, I've been an influencer. I've had a lot of friends who are influencers. Like, I don't want to do it. So like, that's my problem, but at least I won't have the other problem, which is that sometimes it can be hard to step back. Sometimes you can feel like I did this. I want the credit. I want to be the next. The only name that came to mind was Elizabeth Holmes, but that is not the example I want to go with. But that's how that happens, right? You don't want your org to go down with you. So
any tips on how to do that off-ramping gracefully?
One of the main things I think is from day one, making sure the organization has a powerful mission and brand that isn't about you. And I think for me, asking yourself every week, every month, am I doing what I am doing for the sake of the org or for myself? Is this because I think I'm going to get money from this? Or how does it, or even just asking every time you do something, how does this help the organization? And as a founder, you will have to make sacrifices to your personal brand. Honestly, it should, where you can't say things you want, or you may have to change your brand for the sake of the org. How is this for the sake of the org? And then as you are reaching the point where you're transitioning away and the org has a life of its own, one of the biggest things is to continue to lean on the other people who have been a part of your social media plan from day one. So have as many sort of founders or marketers as possible. So I'm always out there being like, hey, CMO, CTO, COO, go out there, talk about the amazing work you're doing. This is equally your thing. You need to go out there and talk about it, share what you're doing. Karen, who's our director of social media, just incredible. She is on our TikTok channel. She's not on there being like, I'm the director of social media, right? So there's like a lot of equality on our socials. I think from day one, thinking about how you're going to have a lot of people who are associated with your brand. And BuzzFeed did this really well. Like they had a really great YouTube channel for a long time. And there's a lot of controversy about how they treated those performers and those directors. But at the end of the day, they had so many different people associated with BuzzFeed, right? So they had so many faces who were marketing their product. It wasn't one person. And I think they did that really well. That's something that you can lean on as you're transitioning away, is who are the next people who are going to be the face and who are going to promote the culture and values you have as an org.
So then I'm going to come back to the second thread from your earlier fascinating exposition, which was this whole question of cash versus non-cash philanthropy. And so far, I think there's been an extraordinary focus on the cash part and the galas and the clothes and everything else. Is there an exchange or a mechanism that you already know where there is this facilitation of if I'm a tech guru and I want to do something, I can just go here? And how does a founder find these resources?
Yeah, it's a great question. So after a whole bunch of trial and error for the past 2 years, I would say two of the best platforms are Volunteer Match, just all levels of talent. So if you want talent acquisition specialists, or you want to grow a team of social media managers, or grow a team of folks who are going to work on very specific projects, Volunteer Match is great. And the second is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn lets you put posts that are volunteer. You can put, the way we do it always is we put volunteer in the title. So nobody misses it. We also mark it as volunteer using LinkedIn's volunteer. And then we actually also include a question saying, do you understand this position is volunteer? So we do it 3 times just so, we're sure we're not hoodwinking anyone. This is not a paid position. But then we do that especially for some of our higher level positions like the C-suite, or when we recruit people, and we get so many applications for our CMO application. We ended up with over 80 applicants, over 25 of whom had been CMOs before. So it was a very difficult decision. We got a really great CMO on board now, and that came through LinkedIn. And the way we do it is we change the countries. So we will do a couple days in the United States, a couple days in India, a couple days in Nigeria, a couple days in the UK, South Africa. So we really try and get applicants from around the world to build out our team. That can be challenging because I wish LinkedIn would just do a global post, but they do make you choose a country. And I will say that LinkedIn definitely has a very strong America bias, so it's not perfect. I want to give those resources out there to anyone who might want them to start. But I would say one of the biggest advantages that we've seen is just by having a really great team of people, you convince people to stay, right? Like there's nothing wrong with volunteer attrition in a nonprofit. It's good when people come in and out. We always, like our talent acquisition team is at Dweebs Global is nearly 100 for 100 at people coming in using the skills that they've learned here and then leaving to get a better job or a job in talent acquisition. And so we're really able to offer our volunteers career development opportunities, personal leadership development opportunities, really offer them something as well as they're spending time with us, and just build a community that cares about each other. So people stay a lot longer than in other volunteer positions. They really feel like it's their org, like they're building something, like this is a side project. It's not just a 2-hour a week or 3-hour a week. Like you go somewhere and volunteer and come home. It's a part of your identity.
So you touched on this multinational presence and footprint. How did that affect your operational model? Did it bring complexity, especially on the legal side, tax side? Can you talk through that whole dimension?
Yeah. Okay, so let me start with the legal and tax side because I think that's easier. We're incorporated in the United States. That means we have to follow American laws, but we always have a risk assessment about other things. So obviously in European Union, we want to follow the GDPR and data privacy laws that are Europe specific. There are a lot of countries in the world where it is illegal to promote being queer, to promote information about being gay. Are we going to do something about this? We have really, really great attorneys who are working on it. Not me, actually. It's not my area of expertise. But we really try to have these conversations and making sure we're always following the laws in the United States and Delaware, where we're incorporated, making sure we're sticking with the law where we need to. We're actually really, really careful and probably overly paranoid about things like data privacy, tax stuff, keeping things really clean, keeping the books clean, making sure there are no conflicts of interest between the way the organization operates, making sure the board, there's no conflict of interest. I do not sit on either board. So being really careful about things like that, because for us, the standard of ethics is a lot higher than where the law is at. Like the law is one thing and ethics is one thing. Because honestly, sometimes what's legal is not ethical enough, right? I would say like operationally working around the world, there have definitely been challenges. And I think one of the biggest, that people say a lot, but is entirely true, is time zones. At the Sentinel, we have very high-level staff who span the Pacific coast of the United States. It really starts in Hawaii. So there are people in Hawaii, and then Pacific coast of the US through East coast of the US. And then I guess this way from your perspective. And then Europe and Nigeria, which is sort of on the same time zone, West African time, Central European time, and then Israel, and then India, and then Australia. There is no time. There is no time when they can all be on the same meeting. So it means either we're dropping Hawaii and it'll be like early Pacific Coast time all the way to late night Australia, or it'll be early morning Australia and we'll be able to make it up until like late Nigeria maybe, but India is asleep. Or India has woken up, Nigeria is asleep. That's the challenge, I will say, is if you have an international enough team, everyone is not going to be on all the meetings at the same time.
So you're just very strategic in terms of when the meetings get set and makes you really careful. Do they really need to be on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you get interesting groups of people, which is lovely.
So I'm sure this has been challenging on multiple fronts, but has there been anything that has been extraordinarily challenging, either externally or internally to yourself?
Yeah, for me, I definitely have a lot of the stereotypic crisis of faith going on, right? Like, am I doing the right thing? Am I sure that I want to sacrifice a lot of my life, a lot of my earning potential as well, right, to this thing? And I think, the news can be dismal. It can also be motivating. Like, you can really just see the impact that one person can have, and that's very motivating. For me, another thing that's a personal challenge for me is volunteer attrition. I'm a very team oriented person. I think volunteer attrition is a really great thing. Like, people coming in and out is a good thing in any nonprofit. But for someone who's very team oriented, very clingy, like, I love people. I love getting to know people, on a personal level. I think that's been really hard for me to get used to, people coming and going out of my life, in and out of my life. I actually am probably one of those people who would have thrived in like the same job for 30 years and working on at my desk. And I'm actually not a natural leader. I actually really like working on research projects or writing projects or project management even, but then getting my little head pats from someone on top. He's like, Isvari, you did a good job, right? And like, given my role at the organization, that's not something that happens, right? Like, I'm the person people look to for guidance. Nobody's like, oh, you did a really good job working late that night. Like, you don't get that. I had really, really supportive bosses at my last workplace. It was really wonderful working for them and getting that sort of like doing the job, right? And I don't get that here. So I would say those have been my challenges. And I think those are always going to be challenges that are harder, at least in my opinion, as a woman of color, because I'm come from an environment where community, family, having people around me is so important to me, and in a way that may not be the same case if you grew up in a more individualistic society. And I see that as well in our volunteer force and workforce, and what's important to people from around the world, depending on where they came from and how they build. So those are my big challenges. I think those challenges probably affect a lot of people, but I do think it's better than the other side if you have maybe too much adoration for being in charge.
So you mentioned your ethnicity and your cultural heritage. We share South Asian heritage. How has that impacted your journey, the direction and the design of your organization?
Yeah, it a ton actually. Like, for in my personal life, definitely it's impacted a ton because now obviously leading the law is something that was crazy, right? Like, crazy to my whole everyone, right? That's not something that is like a well-supported, good Indian daughter thing to do. Like, obviously choosing to do this instead of earning a ton of money or just being in a more traditional career path is something that would be hard for a lot of immigrant families, brown families, Black families who are really trying to be something or give something back or to their families as opposed to the community at large. I think a lot of early people who came on board were from India and Pakistan at Dweebs Global, same true at the DG Sentinel, and that's probably because of who I am and where my audience was online. And to this day, we have a lot of Indians in our organization at the highest levels, people from India, people in India and Pakistan, people in the United States of Indian or Pakistani origin. So I think that that's probably a lot because I am. And so people like to come into an organization where they see other people like them. And actually, I think this is so true because we get a lot of applicants, amazing candidates who are brown and Black from countries overseas, as well as Black and brown Americans. And I think a part of that is just because they see other people who look like them at the organization. And people forget how important that is. They're always like, why do you get so many diverse candidates? And we're like searching so hard and we can't find any. You hear that complaint a lot from majority white orgs. And I think it's because if you don't see other people like you, don't want to be the only minority at an organization. It's really painful. I've been that so many times. It's not fun. So I think it's since from day one, we prioritized making sure that people came from around the world. So we naturally have people from a bunch of different races. So now a whole bunch of people know that it is a comfortable place to work, regardless of where you come from and what your background is. And so I'd say that's been a huge driving factor. For me culturally as well, just growing up with a really strong work ethic, which is like such a cliche, but also just having to manage my own time and be very self-motivated and very rigorous about time management has helped me a ton because obviously I could just let a lot of balls drop. But I don't because I have that built-in work ethic that I learned that I think comes a lot from my culture, from being a daughter of immigrants, from growing up in a family with those expectations. And I think that is also helpful. It has downsides, but it's helpful. I'm going to say it's helpful right now.
How has your cultural or ethnic heritage impacted the fundraising journey?
Yeah, it's definitely made things very challenging. So as I mentioned earlier, like it really still is very much of a white network. There are these groups of white women who have maybe they have landed wealth or maybe they've earned wealth or they have a wealthy spouse. And so they have these networks of folks. And I've been to some of those events and I'm the only person who's a white woman. Or there's a traditional white boys club of venture capitalists or angel investors who invest. And then I found this to be the case personally in the Indian community. Indians don't help other Indians a ton naturally. Like I found that to be the case. I mean, it's kind of sad because you see a lot of other communities who will help others who are a part of the community get ahead. There'll be these special programs. And so I definitely thought about that at first. And I think I found that with the exception of a few amazing folks, of course, right? Like there isn't really that sense of insular Indianness. Another thing is I'm half the million and I'm from the Bay Area, and being half the million in the Bay Area, I was like, why aren't you full the million? So I didn't grow up into that sort of network that a lot of folks have here because I was always on the outside. Like my mom homeschooled us. We had like a really great, very privileged childhood that way, my sister and I, but she looks North Indian and that ostracized us from a lot of the community. So I didn't grow up with that network either. And so I share this as an Indian just to say like, come on, we got to do better. Like we should be helping other people. And I think we should be helping other minorities more broadly. You know, I've found a lot of support from Black men and women who have done so much for minority communities in general, not just their own, right? Like just more broadly. And I feel like, hey, we could do that. We could be out there and we could be championing causes that might not, there might not be a what's in it for me. We could just do it, right? Like, and I think that would be so helpful if there were these stronger donor communities or opportunities for people of color. And there are exceptions to the rule, but in general, it's been a challenge. I don't think there's been a benefit for me. I love my culture. I love like who I am and I love everything about it, but I wouldn't say there's any benefit in my workplace at all. No.
I certainly can understand that. And talking of challenges, has there been like one moment where you really things came down to the wire, or you came really close to quitting, or it was just a standout moment of just you had to dig into everything you had?
I don't think there's been a moment where I've seriously thought about quitting. There have definitely been times that have been really difficult to navigate. I think in terms of, oh my God, this really sucks. Like somebody important, we need to either ask them to step down or like there's some C-suite issue or maybe moments where we're like, hey, this really should have gone better and it didn't go as well. But I'm very much a person who in good times and bad does not spend a lot of time on a thing that just happened. I'm always on to the next thing. One of the huge downsides of this is that when something good happens, I'm always like, oh, great, that happened. Where's our next benchmark? But one of the upsides is that when something bad happens, I'm just like, okay, where's our next benchmark?
And on the other side, has there been some shining moment where you're like, this is why I'm doing it and I'll never give it up?
It's weird because there's a lot of that happens I would say there's been a lot of that happens at Dweebs Global where you help someone and they're like, you changed my life. Or someone comes back a year later and it's like, I got this job I would never have gotten if it hadn't been for you. Or like, we've managed to place people at some really cool places like Google, Apple, Mercedes-Benz, like just these really big companies and people who come from India. I mentioned India and Nigeria a lot because we have on the ground teams there that have done a lot of work. And there are two markets where there are just such brilliant people in both countries who are just completely forgotten in the global market for no good reason. And, there's obviously a lot of people in like Bangalore who've managed to really break into the global market. But in East India or Northeast India, that's not as much, right? So I feel like there's all these communities that are forgotten. And like when we are able to raise awareness or when we're able to get somebody in position, that's really cool. I feel like whenever I get those messages, I'm like, my first thought, and this is my own problem, and I'm working on it from a mental health perspective, but my first thought is like, oh my God, is the fact that I haven't heard from everyone else means this is the only good that I did? Every time someone new and cool joins our advisory board at the Sentinel, like we've had some really cool additions to our board, like Emmy Award winners and amazing producers and best-selling. Every time somebody joins, I'm like, oh, now I need to go find someone else, right? Like now, like this, like clearly this won't be enough, like, or this person's going to want us to see more. They don't want to be the last person to join. Now we just need to go do more. So I need to get better at this. I need to be able to like celebrate a moment for more than 0.2 seconds. I'm working on it.
Looking back, it's just a really incredible journey. Has there been, what do you wish you knew that you know now that you wish you'd known going in?
Yeah, it's such a good question. There's like 10 million things. And I've like thought about like writing all of it down, just to like share and be like, here, do these things if you want to start a nonprofit. The big thing is your team and learning how to build a team and remove people if they are not working. Do not let them drag the whole team down. So I feel like this is so important. And it's hard for me because as a leader, I always want to be nice to people. I always want to give people a lot of time and effort, but who your team is the most important thing. And so I would say 90% of the skills I've learned and 90% of the things I want to pass on to other people is be so sure about the team that you're creating, right? That they're committed to the vision, that they aren't trying to convert it into something that's for profit. If you're a nonprofit, that's really important because it's easier than it sounds like to turn a nonprofit into a for profit. And if you have different goals, that's very difficult. Make sure you find people who are not going to ghost. It's okay. It's 100% okay to find people who are going to say, no, I cannot do something, or I'm only here for 4 weeks and I'm going to leave, or who are going to tell you with like a month's notice, hey, I'm going to be leaving in a month. Awesome. Don't find people who are going to be like, yes, I'm going to do something and then not do it. If somebody does that, like immediately take action to ask them what's going on, figure out a good way to fix it. Get a good human resources person. Like I said, like CHRO, director of human resources is the most important role. Talk to them about it. And if it doesn't work, let them go and move on. And since I learned this lately, I will share the best way to get someone to step down from a position, whether volunteer or paid, is to just say, hey, as you know, we are doing XYZ and this is the job description and these are the things that we need. Are you still able to meet these goals? Are you still able to perform at this level? It looks like you're not been able to like dedicate this many hours anymore. You may be busier. You may have other goals in life. Are you still able to do this? We would love to have you. And you sort of guide them to themselves making the decision that I do not have time for this. And I think I'm going to step down. So that way you keep good blood. Like I feel like a lot of people feel the need to fire someone before they leave. Like you can't fire me, I'm leaving, right? No, that's what you want. That's what you want. You want someone to say, you can't fire me, I'm leaving, because that's so much less drama, especially as volunteers, right? Like where you're not thinking about this from a perspective of severance or like the legality of it, right? You're just thinking, you want people to feel good about leaving. You want them to feel like they left on their terms, even if you really needed that position vacant. So these are the things that I've learned that I would love to share, that I would love to pass on, is just like that team is so important. And if you don't know these things, and most people don't, most young people especially don't, because like I never learned in school how to be a leader, right? Because that's not something they teach you. Get a good human resources director, someone who's been HR director or CHRO of another organization that's similar or has experience working with people around the world, has worked through these thorny issues. Director of human resources from yesterday just had such a great tip where he was like, don't ask yes or no questions, right? Like ask people, how are you going to do this? When will I hear from you by? Right. And so these things I learn all the time by surrounding myself with people who are, who have these other leadership skills I can learn from. And I think that's so important. It's like, just make sure the people around you trust them and they are equally committed and going to move things forward.
And dialing way back to the start, before you have a CHRO or anything like that, if there's one bit of advice you'd give to someone starting out, doesn't know all of this stuff, very committed to mission, wants to do a nonprofit, what would that advice be?
I thought about this and I actually have, I always have these little tidbits, but I actually have one that I feel like people always say, don't give up. I have the opposite, know when to give up. Know when to give up, like know when to say no, know when something isn't working and you have to course correct. Don't feel like you have to keep fighting down a path that's full of thorns, that isn't working, that like just to prove that you didn't fail. Like it is okay to fail. It is okay to give up. To just be like, I don't want to do this anymore. I have this new idea. This didn't work. We're going to just shut this down. We're going to do something else. There have been huge failure points at Dweebs Global where we tried something and it didn't work at all. And, we probably kept it alive longer than it needed to because we didn't just know when to give up, when to be like, this isn't working. We need to just move our resources into a different area, cut that team. That's not going to operate anymore. So I feel like this message, don't give up, has been told so much. I just want to say the opposite, know when to give up. If something is screaming at you, it's like, you don't want to do this, it's making you miserable, it's not working, you need to try something new, just give up. There's no shame in giving up. Just give up, do something else.
Awesome. And is there something that you wish I'd asked you, but I didn't?
Oh, goodness. I didn't think about this. The first thing that always comes to mind is you didn't ask, but I have a dog. He's a long-haired miniature dachshund. He's adorable. He's actually
I love
right here. I kind of want to lift him up and show him, but yeah.
Yeah, can see
Yeah, hold on. Rishi, come here. Hold on. Let me get him. This is, if you ask like a dog mom, what is the one thing I wish you'd ask? It's always something to do with this guy. So it's my dog.
Oh, he's cute.
Yeah, his name's Rishi. He's actually on the board of Dweebs Global because when we originally created the organization, he was the dog in Dweebs and Dogs, and we put him on.
So he was the dog.
Yeah, he's the dog. He's the dog. He's also on LinkedIn. He's on LinkedIn at, I think, linkedin.com/in/puppy. He's got his whole profile up there. He's a very accomplished little dog.
I gotta tell you, he's got a statesmanly look about him. He looks like a statesman.
Yeah, he
looks
is.
like
He's a statesman. You may have heard him in the background when I was speaking, barking. That's his diplomatic negotiations for the day with the other dogs.
Well, thank you. That was a very good catch. I'm so glad that I asked you that question. It was a totally worthwhile introduction. And on that note, I want to say thank you. This has been a phenomenal conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so sweet of you to say. I really appreciate it. It's been really wonderful chatting. Thank you.
Awesome. So we'll be back in touch. I wish you all the very best. And thank you so much.
Thank you. You too. I can't wait to see everything that you do.
Isvari was without question one of the most unusual and thought-provoking entrepreneurs I've talked to. She gave me a lot to think about, and 3 insights really stood out for me. First, I was struck by how intentional and professional she was in designing Dweebs Global. Whether it's the volunteer structure, the offering, or the platform in which the mentors and mentees are matched, they've all been thought through with a very clear eye towards the organization's values and long-term sustainability, even to the extent of handling cross-border legal issues by tapping into a team of professionals with the right expertise. She left nothing to chance. Second, she separated Dweebs Global, which is a volunteer mentoring organization, from DG Sentinel, which is a media platform. That's pretty interesting. They have separate missions, although they're related, and the way that the structure is separated allows for a cleaner and much more focused management, which, quite frankly, gives each a much better shot at fulfilling its mission, better than a blended organization could. Now, it's more work for sure, but it's been done very thoughtfully and true to purpose. Last but not least, the intentional design of the business model for DG Sentinel integrates how they earn revenue in a way that fully supports the community of entrepreneurs and individuals so that every party is better off as a result. There's no savior and the saved, just a really intelligent model that serves both the economic and the mission goals of all the parties involved. So, how can you weave your venture's mission and values better into your economics and structure, whether you're building a nonprofit or for-profit or anything in between? Thanks for listening to today's episode. We have show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achieve.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe and share with a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go be an achiever.